This is the library at Angles. And Angles was the home of Alvin Barkley, the Vice President of the United States under President Harry Truman. With me is David Barkley, Alvin Barkley's one and only son.
That's right.
And we're just here today for David Barkley to educate me a little bit as to what it has been like to have spent how many years?
Well, we bought this in 36 and remodeled it in 37. And,
so that'd be 42 years.
well, I didn't live there all the time because, you see, we had a home in Washington, and also I was getting ready to go back in the Army. I thought there was a war coming on, and I went back in 19.
Well, before we get into Angles here, I was going to ask how many years you spent being Alvin Barkley's son.
All my life.
Which is, how many years now?
40, well, let's see, I'm 73 now. I'll soon be 74.
74 years as Alvin Barkley's son.
Yeah.
What has that done to your life to make it easier and to have made it harder?
Well, it's done a great deal of both. It made it hard sometimes. People expect you to live up to the standards that were set by your daddy, which is considerably hard for an ordinary guy. But it gave me a marvelous father and a wonderful mother and a life in Washington stretching from Woodrow Wilson's first inauguration right through until my father's death in 1956.
Well, this is the way I'd like to spend the time, is remembering things that have stuck in your mind as being significant, things that you remember or having been worth remembering in your time.
All right, I'll tell you the first thing that happened to me as Alvin Barkley's son. Woodrow Wilson and my father came to Washington in 1913, the same year. That was his first term in Congress, and it was Wilson's first term as president. And my father had worked very hard for Mr. Wilson, and Mr. Wilson was an acquaintance of his. So when Mr. Wilson was coming that year to make his address to the Congress, I'm not sure whether this was the message to the Congress which Mr. Wilson first delivered himself rather than having it sent down and read or not. But anyway, my dad had me along. I was a little 7-year-old in 1913. And he was delegated to escort President Wilson up from the ground floor to the floor of the House of Representatives and usher him through the lobby into the chamber, and he took me with him. And I remember being in that elevator with President Wilson and my daddy, and having this tall, dignified gentleman pat me on the head and tell my daddy, "He's a fine boy, Alvin, he's a fine boy."
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I want you to remember.
And everybody had his head patted by Woodrow Wilson.
That's right, that's right. All right, now, the family didn't actually move to Washington with Congressman Barkley on that first term as congressman, did they?
No, well, we didn't. That is, we moved. I moved. My sisters, my two younger sisters, Laura and Marion, I think they stayed behind the first year. But we were up there as a family soon thereafter. First, when I was there along with my mother and father during the first term, we lived at an old hotel called the Congress Hall Hotel, which was right across the street from the House Office Building. There was only one at that time. And the place where the Congress Hall Hotel now stands, then stood, is now taken up by another House Office Building. I don't know which one it is. They have three now, I think. But we lived there for a while, my father and mother and I. Then we moved to various apartments. We moved from there to the Burlington Hotel, which is right off of Thomas Circle on 14th Street in Washington. And then fathered way up 14th Street on the top of the hill to Fontenay Court.
What was family life like with your father in Congress?
Just like yours.
Come home, kick off your shoes in the evening, have dinner together?
Absolutely. He used to take me over to the office sometime and let me fool around in the office. Congressman only had one office in those days and one secretary. No lollygagging around. They made $7,500 a year.
That was the salary for
That
Congress?
was the salary for the congressman. $7,500
Well,
a year.
did you go to a public school?
Of course I went to public school.
Just along with everybody else?
Why, certainly.
Not like you were privileged
Look,
or anything?
Congressmen in Washington, D.C. were then, and I presume are now, a dime a dozen. They really are. There's
Some
no
people say they bring a higher price now.
Oh, could be. But there was no distinction in being a congressman's child. A lot of my friends were congressman's child. Joe Burns, whose father was a very famous congressman from Tennessee, was a good friend of mine. Bill Mondale and his sisters and brothers were good friends of mine. Their father was Congressman Mondale from Wyoming, who was the Republican majority or minority leader in the House of Representatives. Maybe it was a majority then, I've forgotten. He was a Republican leader.
Well, a lot of people think, growing up with a father who is well known, some of the celebrity sort of rubs off on the children, or they think that you are richer or more famous, or something sets you apart and makes you distinctly different from
there's
ordinary
the other
people.
side of the coin there, too. In the University of Virginia, where I went to college, there was a man who taught a course in geology, in which I was very interested, because all my life I had intended to become a professional naturalist. But he didn't like congressmen's children. And he made it very evident. Snide remarks from the lectern and allusions to congressmen's children and so on.
So you were favored or got special treatment?
Oh, I got special treatment. Passing grade at the University of Virginia was 75. You know what I got in his course?
74.
74.
And you knew it was coming?
I knew it was coming, and I went to him. I'm sorry, Mr. Barkley, we can't change it. I went to the dean, who was a very famous dean. He said, I can't go against my professors. I even went to President Alderman, who was the president. He said, I'm sorry, Bud. His son, Tony, was a good friend of mine. I can't change it. I can't. We have to work as a team. You're going to have to take it as a failure.
So it stood?
Sure it stood. Sure it
And
stood.
You went to school and to college while your dad was in Congress there in Washington? Okay. What did you want to become? Usually when you're in high school, you're in college, you think of becoming something. I know when I was going to school, the teachers encouraged you to make a career decision, and you had to go to school for some purpose.
You attended a different type of school. They didn't encourage you to choose a career. They sort of left that up to you. I, as I said before, was interested in woodcraft, nature. I wanted to become a professional naturalist with a specialization in ornithology, which is birds, of course. I was very active in Boy Scouts and all manner of woodcraft studies and stuff like that. But at an early age, I got infatuated with aircraft.
Now, the airplane came along about 1907 or so, and so it was born about the same time you were, wasn't it?
Well, yes.
And you sort of grew up with it.
Well, yeah, I remember the first ride I ever had in an airplane. I couldn't have been over 12, from a field out in Fort Myer, which is across the river in Virginia from Washington. And I thought, this is for me. And I started flying clandestinely with various people around at these little jerkwater flying fields, and then eventually I got an appointment to...
Would this be those old kind of biplanes that we see with the double wings? And that's
right.
what you learned to fly in?
That's what I learned to fly
They
in.
didn't look like they were very substantial. They still don't.
Well, they were made out of wood and fabric. They weren't made out of metal. And the biplane with the wing struts and the landing wires and the flying wires, they weren't substantial like these internally braced all-metal wings are today, but they were a lot of fun. I'd much rather fly one of those than fly one of these things where you push a button here and
Did your interest in aviation and in flying have any influence when Vice President candidate Alvin Barkley was running for vice president and took the airplane sort of as his vehicle to travel and make those speeches? He traveled so many hundred thousands of miles by plane.
I don't think that my interest in airplanes, because when he ran for vice president, that was in 1948, I had been in the Air Corps, as it was then. It was the Army Air Corps when I went in it. I went in 31, and so when he ran in 48, I had been a pilot.
Well, I thought maybe your early interest had sort of encouraged him to take that, because several people have commented on the fact.
It's a funny thing. My dad, when I was stationed at Fort Crockett, we flew one of the first all-metal jobs there were, called the A-12. And no, A-8. We had A-8s then, too. Had a press-stone-cooled Conqueror motor in the front and a wing externally braced, not internally braced. And the commander, who was Horace Hickam, Colonel Horace Hickam, for whom Hickam Field is named in Hawaii, said, my dad came down to visit me. I was a second lieutenant. He said, your dad will undoubtedly want to go for a ride with you. And I said, well, fine, I'll go ahead and take him. Well, it turns out, don't know whether I knew it then or later, my dad was frightened of sitting in an open cockpit. Now, he felt perfectly safe in the inside of a cabin aircraft, but he didn't like
the feel of the wind.
Well, in this A-8, the pilot and the rear gunner, or bombardier, what do you want to call it, were separated by a long section of aircraft, and there was no method of communication between the two of them at that time. Well, anyway, they got him in, and my Colonel Hickam said, now, Bud, don't you do any fancy stuff with him. At the time, it was rumored he was going to be made Secretary of War. He never materialized, but they were giving him the... So I took him up, and I gave him the smoothest ride you ever saw. And I brought him back down, and I could see, as I went along, I could see his shadow. He was standing there gripping the side. He didn't like it, I don't believe.
He didn't have any compliments when he got on the ground.
Oh, yeah, he was...
When he got down.
He told Colonel Hickam, he said, he took me up and went like this, and he went like that. Good God. But I said, Colonel, he said, I know, he doesn't understand.
Did you ever have occasion to sort of help your dad in politics, or was it the political aspect of his life separate from yours?
Well, I never had much skill at it. My father had a true love of people, all people, masses of people, that I didn't have. Now, I have helped him many times, but only in a subsidiary role. I never was a part of the campaign. One time in 1928, we were campaigning for Al Smith in Kentucky. Dad was the campaign chairman. We had headquarters in Louisville, living in the that old German name.
Seelbach?
Seelbach, Louis Seelbach's hotel. And we had bought a Dodge businessman's coupe. which was stripped down to absolutely the bare essentials. And we were touring all over Kentucky. I would drive and he would speak. Now, he was making anywhere from 5 to 8 speeches a day, going from town to town in this little Dodge coupe. And I would drive and he would sleep. And he would get out and speak and I would sleep. Then he would get in and sleep and I would drive, and it went on. And that's how we were able to do that. Incidentally, during that time we were headed for Paducah. Now, there were no bridges across the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers. You had to cross by a ferry. And if you didn't get the ferry by nightfall,
Forget
you
it.
didn't get it. There were no hotels in the land between the Cumberland and the Tennessee.
It seems like a long trip now. I bet it was really long then.
Gravel roads all over. Well, we got to the ferry. We were coming to Paducah. We got to the ferry on the Cumberland. And we got on there, and he said, go fast. We might go miss that thing over the Tennessee River. So I went with gravel spurting in all directions. And we pulled up to the Tennessee River just in time to see the last ferry pulling over towards the west bank of the Tennessee. So there we were. So we spent the night sleeping in the businessman's coupe. Caught the first ferry out.
And even
the
though the
next
ferry
morning.
could see you, they wouldn't come back and get you.
Hell no, they wouldn't come back and get you.
Just let you sleep there.
Sure.
Let me jump again, because as long as I've got a chance to talk with you, you said as long as I ask the questions that you
Go
tell
ahead.
the lies, right? That was their deal. Tell me about the time that your dad ran for governor, since we've just gone through a gubernatorial race here. That was the one election that your dad lost.
He ran for the nomination. He didn't run for governor.
Oh, this was primary.
He ran in the primary, and he lost.
But that's the only time.
That's the only time he lost.
Were you helping him or working
Oh,
with him
no,
at that
no,
time?
no, no, no.
That was
I
in
was-
23. That was,
Yeah.
you must
I
have
was in college. That was my first year in college. So I was not.
Oh, I see.
I was not in that at all.
Okay, well, let's then me just let you search through your memories. And you mentioned the one time of President Woodrow Wilson in the elevator patting you on the head. What other incidents and memories are recorded that came about because you were who you were, that you think would be worth
You
sharing?
can't get it through your head that I wasn't anybody.
You are the only one who's been
I'm-
David Barkley.
Well, I know, but that didn't mean anything, and it doesn't now. I was just an ordinary kid in Washington. Now, that was lucky. I mean, my great-grandchildren can say great-granddaddy had his head patted by Woodrow Wilson, if that means anything to him. But I'll tell you something that happened. When I was a Boy Scout, I was about 11 years old. The Scouts in Washington, D.C., I belonged to Troop 42. We were called out, and we carried long poles, and I think they call them quarterstaffs. And we were called out to control the crowds around the president's, now I've forgotten whether it was inauguration or some big celebration. And we lined up one pole between each two scouts to hold the crowds back. And the president or one of his aides or somebody told us. I'm telling you this just to show you the difference between then and now. Now, when I was 11 years old, that would be 1917. Maybe it was General Foch. He came here, you know, during the war, during the early...
The French general.
Yes. This gentleman told us, he said, I want you boys to realize that this is a very prominent day in your lives because you are the only uniformed group to guard the President of the United States of America.
It was the Boy Scouts.
The Boy Scouts. And we were. Now, there were a few city policemen around, but we were the only organized, uniformed body guarding the President of the United States. Couldn't do that now.
That's right. I think you have had a significant time here. Let me ask another question, and maybe you just don't want to answer this. I don't know.
All right.
But sometimes, growing up as the child of a person who has the capacity to love a lot of people and to be loved by a lot of people, the child might feel left out.
Oh, no.
Never?
No, my father had more love for me and for my sisters and my mother than you could shake a stick at. Now, he was not adept at articulating it. He couldn't put his arms around me and say, "Son, I love you," without great, it's something, I don't know what it was. It was hard for him to do that. I do it easily, but it was hard for him. But once my partner, when I was in the public relations business, and I were in Washington, we went in one of Dad's offices, and we left that one, went way down the hall to another one. And Lefty, my partner, pretty soon Dad came in. And he sat there and talked with us for a while and then left. And Lefty said, "Boy, that man really loves you, really loves you." He said, "The Vice President of the United States walked all the way down that hall, got in the elevator and changed floors just to be in the same room with you." I realized that he was telling the truth. It must have been frustrating for Dad not to be able to say "I love you," but he expressed it in a lot of ways, because there was never a father that was as good to me, in my knowledge. He put up with a lot from me. I was not an ideal son by a long way.
What makes you say that?
Well, I was a scalawag. I drank too much when I was young. I was adventurous and did things that ordinary people wouldn't do or didn't think of doing, I guess. But I never heard a word of complaint out of Dad. That's pretty good.
I think that's pretty good. Let my mind jump again to another incident that I remember of Alvin Barkley, and that was the night of the election returns in 1948, when he was running for vice president. I can remember my dad sitting up by the radio until the wee hours of the night, and I couldn't sit up anymore, and I went to bed, and I must have been 8 years old, 9 years old at the time. How did you spend that night?
We all were right here in Angles. Right? Actually, this room was the main room then. And they had the TV cameras and coils and cables this big around all over the place. Looked like a nest of vipers. And I had talked to Dad. I had driven him around a couple of days, and I told him, I said, "Dad, now listen. I know this is a vital thing for you. It's an important race, and you have never lost, except that thing with the governor." But I said, don't be too intense on winning. Don't let it come as a real disappointment to you if you should not be elected. Well, he said, I understand that. I know. And I wanted him to know that there was a possibility of him losing. Well, anyway, we came back. The newspaper guys were here. The TV guys were here. Who was that commentator? One of the commentators here, I've forgotten his name now. Mofield, Ray Mofield, who was then a little reporter, big Dr. Mofield down at Murray.
Yeah.
Ray was here. And we were all sitting around, you know. And about 11 o'clock, Dad said, "I'm tired of this. I'm going to bed." So he walked into the bedroom, which is now my bedroom, the one you were in, and went to sleep. The rest of us sat up all night. And, of course, it turned out that they won. Harry Truman did the same thing, they tell me. I don't remember.
Well, after that time, when he became vice president, where were you in your stage of life? Were you living with him in Washington then, or what were you doing about this time?
Let's see, that was 48. Oh, I had gotten out of the Army, gone on inactive status, and I had taken a job right outside of Chicago, with a manufacturing firm as public relations counsel. I spent about a year up there, and I didn't like it. It was cold. Of course, it's just cold down here now as it was up there then. So I came back, and in '47, my mother had died. So Dad was a bachelor. So my wife and my 2 children and I moved into Angles. And Dad and I bought some farms, and we tried to farm them.
He was in Washington, and you were taking care of the farms here.
Trying to take care of them. I was never any great shakes as a farmer, although I worked hard at it. Then in '49, of course, he met Jane and married her. Incidentally, I have this distinction of having been the best man at my father's wedding and the best man at my son's wedding. Now, very few people can say that.
Well, you also have the distinction of having a father who is active in politics and having a son who is becoming
That's
active
right.
in politics.
Today, just yesterday, my son was elected Kentucky Commissioner of Agriculture, and I couldn't be prouder. He worked.
If, I don't know, if you could introduce your granddaughters, Annie and Laura, to their great-grandfather, how would you go about doing that? If we took a few minutes on this program and you could talk just to your granddaughters, because I noticed the books, the scrapbooks of trying to tell them some things, what would you want to try to leave them with or impress them with about their great-grandfather?
Nothing except that he was a wonderful man. He loved children. Look, there he is. This is Alvin, and that's Dottie. And that's my father. There isn't anything particularly that I'd want to tell them about him, except that he's a wonderful man.
Do you have any dreams of what Angles might one day become?
Well, I had hoped that it could be bought by the state and turned into a sort of place where people could come and see these marvelous things that my mother and father collected. Keep it furnished as it is. Make it into a sort of minor league Mount Vernon. And let the people come in and see these things. For instance, that bed warmer there, the brass bed warmer in the drawing room there.
Oh, yeah.
My mother bought enough of those so that every room in this house has one.
And you put the hot coals in there.
You put the hot coals in there and did them in between the sheets at night so you didn't have to get into a very cold bed. She loved those things.
Well, I don't know exactly how to end
You're
this.
running out of things to say.
Yeah, I don't exactly know how to end it. I don't want to end it. And I would like to sort of...
Keep on going because you may not get back here.
I would like to...